In Missouri Trout Flies, How to Tie and Fish Them, Ed's story introduces the idea of a reverse palmer, and I was a little confused by his definition, so I contacted Feathercraft when I placed an order and asked them about it, and his son, Bob, replied to me with the proper definition of palmer and reverse palmer. So to palmer just generally means to wrap a hackle spiraled through the body of the fly, starting at the back of the fly and wrapping it towards the front. For a regular palmer, tie the hackle feather in with the shiny side out and with the dull side towards the hook shank, and by the tip, particularly, for example, on a woolly bugger, where you want the fibers to grow wider as they go towards the eye of the hook. If you're not concerned about which direction those fibers get longer or smaller, I suppose it doesn't matter, but generally tie in by the tip of the feather. And then as you wrap, it's spiraling wraps, but you keep the dull side of the feather pointed towards the bend of the hook, and you keep the shiny side of the feather pointed towards the eye of the hook, and that's the natural way for that feather to lean or to act as it is wrapped on the hook shank. And what will happen then in a regular palmer is that the fibers that are wrapped around the shank, palmered through the body, will lean backwards towards the bend of the hook. And this is generally what you would use for a wet fly. So a woolly bugger is a good example of a wet fly that has a palmered body where the fibers are tied in back at the tail and then spiraled across the body, and you can see how the fibers then lean back towards the bend of the hook. And that would be considered just a regular palmered fly. The reverse palmer then is used with a dry fly hackle for a dry fly, and it is generally tied in by the butt. I have clipped the fibers on the butt so I get those little barbs that'll help attach that feather to my hook shank. I'm going to wrap those in and bring my thread up to behind the eye. Now what I've done with this one is I have tied the shiny side towards the hook, the dull side out. And as I wrap it, then I'm going to keep that orientation. I'm going to keep the shiny side towards the back of the hook, and I'm going to keep the dull side towards the eye of the hook and put my spiraling wraps on that shank. This would be what I believe Ed's story intended, and what his son confirms is the reverse hackle. And that's the way I'm using these two terms. Now you'll notice that the fibers on this particular tie are facing forward. The fibers are leaning towards the eye of the hook in the reverse palmer, and this would be used for a dry fly. So flies like the crackleback use this particular method in order for them to be a dry fly and float. So when they are pulled through the water, they are going to stay on top rather than go under. Although, depending on the kind of hook you use and what else you use in the material, you might want to put some floatant on it, but it is intended to be a dry fly. So this then, the reverse palmer used for dry flies, where you tie the feather in with the shiny side towards the shank, the dull side out, and as you wrap it, you keep that shiny side pointing towards the hook bend, and you keep the dull side pointing towards the eye, and it causes the fibers to lean forward. I don't know if this is the definitive answer, but it is the answer that I'm going with. And when I tie my flies and give instructions for tying them, I will call this direction the reverse hackle. And when I tie them as in a woolly bugger with the fibers bending back towards the hook bend, I will call that a regular palmer.